Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today. As we're getting underway, I wanted to share that this discussion is being recorded, and if you have any question, you can put it in the chat or raise your hand. In order to maximize bandwidth, we are requesting that everyone keep their cameras off except the farmer panel, or if you are asking a question. Also, please make sure to mute your microphone unless you're asking a question. Now, before we get started, we have a few polling questions for you. So we request that you please provide your feedback on the poll that's going to pop up on your screen. All right. Well, before we get started with the panel discussion, we felt it was important to share a little bit about the Illinois Nutrient Loss Reduction Strategy, or the NLRS, as well as the program that is supporting today's panel. So the Illinois Nutrient Loss Reduction Strategy, or the NLRS, was created through a collaborative effort by groups like the Illinois EPA, the Illinois Department of Agriculture, and the University of Illinois. And it's this collaborative effort that is one way in which the Illinois strategy is unique from other state strategies. And other states are seeing the value of our partnerships and are adopting similar strategies within their own states. Now, the Illinois plan was released in 2015, almost 10 years to the day, to address nutrient loads from urban stormwater, point sources, and agricultural sources. Now, it's really important to note that the plan is not saying that agriculture is the only source of nutrient loss, but recognizing that nutrient loss comes from multiple sectors and they all need to be addressed in order for us to reach our goals. Nutrient loss and hypoxia impact our local water bodies and our local water quality. So when we're working to address nutrient loss, it isn't just to reduce the size of the hypoxic zone in the Gulf, but also to address local concerns. The end goal is to reduce total nitrogen and total phosphorus losses by 45%. And at this point in time, Illinois has not yet adopted a date to reach that goal. The interim goal that Illinois has adopted is to reduce nitrate nitrogen by 15% and total phosphorus by 25% by the end of 2025. Now, a large amount of the nutrients leaving Illinois are attributed to agriculture. And the breakdown on the slide is from our original strategy. And this is looking at the contributions attributed to each source or each sector. Now you'll notice that agriculture is a large contributor of total nitrogen as well as nitrate nitrogen. It's about 80% and about half of the total phosphorus leaving the state. And so this is why agriculture is a focal point not only for me, but many of our NLRS partners. The priority watersheds are an element that's required for each state's strategy. And in Illinois, the priority watersheds were identified in our original strategy, and the map that is on the slide is available on the Illinois EPA website. Now, the outlined watersheds are the watersheds that can make the greatest impact on nutrient loss reduction in Illinois. The blue watersheds are nitrate nitrogen priority watersheds, and the orange are our phosphorus priority watersheds. The watersheds that are served by Illinois Extension Watershed Outreach Associates are the Lower Rock River and the Mississippi North Central, so right here, and that is by Nicole Haverbeck, and the Embra and the Little Wabash are served by Luke Zwilling. And I am a statewide educator, so I support the work that is being done by the Watershed Outreach Associates, and I also serve the part of the state that they do not. Identifying and overcoming barriers to adoption is something that our team works on, and cover crop adoption in Illinois was around 6% on our 21 million acres in corn and soybeans in 2022, according to the NASS survey. So the cover crop program is one method that we are working on to increase cover crop adoption. Now, there are several barriers to the adoption of cover crops. So the goal of this program is to completely remove the cost of seed as one of the ways that we're trying to increase adoption to new and newer farmers to cover crops. So as I mentioned, the program targets farmers who are new or newer to cover crops, and it began in 2019. And at that point in time, the program was funded through a US EPA grant, which expired in 2023. Our team was able to secure funding through the Illinois Soybean Association to continue this project into 2024, and we were able to distribute seed to 3 counties in total within the priority watersheds. And this year, we were able to increase that, and we are providing seed to 5 counties. A huge factor to the success of this program is working with our local soil and water conservation districts who help contact the farmers as well as distribute the seed. Now, since the beginning of the program, free cover crop seed has been provided to approximately 7,700 acres within Illinois' priority watersheds. And now I'm going to turn things over to our farmer panelists. So I want to thank you, Norm, John, and Brian for being with us today. And if we could start out, would each of you like to introduce yourselves, where you're located, and a little bit about your operation?
Would you like to go first?
Good question. Sorry. Brian, could you start us off?
Sure. So my name's Brian Corkle. I farm in southeastern Henry County and in Stark County as well. I raise corn and soybeans. We've been, my family's been conservation minded. I'm 6th generation. So we started no-tilling in the late 1970s on a small scale. We've grown that. We're over time. We added strip till in the mid 1990s. So everything's either strip till or no till. We started planting cover crops in 2010 for simple reasons at that time, but now looking more specifically at things like soil health and nutrient cycling and things like that. So careful about what we do, and we've used government programs like CSP over the last maybe 13 years at this point, to try to expand some other conservation practices as well, but also including cover crops. And I have been farming for 34 years. My dad and I farmed together for that long. He's kind of pretty much exited the operation now. So it's kind of I'm on my own for the most part, other than from some help in the fall. So yeah, that's it about me.
Norm, do you go next?
Yeah, I am up in Northwest Illinois in Carroll County and Ogle County. Uh, our our family, we farm about 700 acres, but of that 700 acres, we rent about 400 out, and I farm 300 of that. I rent a lot of it out that goes into hay ground exclusively, again, to kind of save the soils and build the soils. I've been no-tilling since 1985, farming 40 years. When I say farming 40 years, I also worked off the farm the majority of those 40 years. So I farmed, but worked off the farm as well. Like been no-tilling since 85. I said probably started cover crops in 2018. There's a lot of things out there that are helpful. CSP is very helpful. I'm enrolled in the Precision Conservation Management Program, which is very helpful and helps out with that. So raise corn, soybeans, and like I said, the alfalfa that we rent out.
John?
I'm John Pike, live at Williamson County and farm some just south of Marion. Been no-tilling and cover cropping hard for the last 12 years. Our family had dabbled in some of that before, but in addition to farming, I'm also a former research agronomist for the U of I and ran a research farm down here. And since leaving the University of Illinois, I'm involved in several projects involved with nutrient management and water quality through NREC and other funding sources. So I'm involved with a lot of farmers that are intensive cover crop and no-till managers across a wide area, and do a lot of speaking in a several state area through the winter time. So I get a lot of contact with folks that are doing a lot of interesting things. And I get a chance to bring some of those best ideas back to our farm and incorporate that in some of the trials that I'm involved in here. But as far as the adoption strategy for our farm, it's pretty much to do with water management, with the lighter soils that we have and the rolling ground here in deep southern Illinois. We always joke that we were only 3 or 4 days away from a drought in the summertime. And with the adoption of cover crops and good management practices that I've been fortunate enough to learn from others, and some of the projects that I've been involved in, we can see tremendous changes to our soils and the water holding capacity and just all of the agronomic dynamics involved with things, and have been able to show some yield increases, and it's been a good road to go down. And I really enjoy working with cover crops and all the farmers that are involved with the projects that I manage across the southern part of the state.
And could each one of you touch on how much of your operation you own versus how much is rented? And Norm, I think you kind of already covered this, but John, Brian?
I farm mostly family ground. I do custom farm a couple of small patches for neighbors and friends, but all of that is managed like I would manage the rest of the farm.
Yeah, in my case, about 45% of what I farm is family owned and 55% is rented. And much like John, I treat it like I treat my family owned ground. So we still use a lot of the same practices, and even though we don't necessarily get compensated for it, and I know I'm leaving them in a better place whenever I retire or whatever happens, if the farm's sold and I lose it, whatever happens. I look at it as I'm leaving what I'm a caretaker of in better shape than when I took it over. So we're to the point, because we've been doing it so long, and we've a lot of the ground that we've rented, we've been renting for, gosh, at least 25 years. We're seeing the benefits of what we're doing. So it's becoming more profitable at this point, but at the same point in time, we kind of took that on ourselves. So
I'm going to move on to the next question. What are or were your barriers to adoption of cover crops, or why were you hesitant to adopt this practice, and what did you do to overcome those barriers? John, can we start with you on this one?
Yeah, I think one of the things that held us back in getting started sooner was just a lack of acreage to spread equipment out over. Mike Plummer, who is a former U of I extension agent in Williamson County, was sort of one of the pioneers to no-till and a lot of the cover crop adoption that is practiced in the state now. He was the extension advisor here, and I can remember going to meetings that he put on in the county and a bigger part of southern Illinois as a kid. And while we didn't do a lot of those things on our farm, I can remember my grandpa saying that watch him, because that was the thing that the way to think going down the road. And then I was fortunate enough to work with Mike in Extension, and then after his retirement, while I was have done other things, but able to kind of watch what's going on and get the ball rolling on our farm came about later than I would have liked it. But I think in watching and trying a few smaller things through the years, we just knew that was the way to go.
Ryan?
So I think probably the biggest barrier at the time when we were starting was lack of knowledge. So actually through social media, connected with some guys to give me some guidance getting started, and then attending meetings and talking with people who had been, starting to use cover crops or had experience with it, and getting some knowledge there to kind of smooth out some of the mistakes. Not that we still don't make some mistakes, but and then I would say the other thing, probably another barrier is labor in the fall, because we would like to. The plan every year is we're going to follow the combine and get cover crop seeded, and we do fly some on, but not on everything. Having that labor that you trust to do that has probably been another barrier. So we've been pretty good the last few years, but we've had several years in like 19, 20, 21, where maybe we didn't get everything cover crop that we wanted to, just because of lack of labor and having to wait until after harvest when we had some labor available to do it. So maybe it needs to be a little bit more of a focus on that side of things. So I guess those would be kind of what I've seen as barriers in my operation.
Norm?
As far as barriers to get in, I mean, I don't think I had any. It was a necessity that I needed to take the no-till and add the cover crops, just from the standpoint where we're at is I have some lighter soils, and erosion was an issue. So especially on my bean ground in the fall, what do I got to do to save that erosion? So the mindset was this: we've got to do it. I think some of the barriers that Brian has said is, how do you get it on the fall? We're a little bit further north, so the season gets shorter. How do you get it on? How do you get it established? And then the learning curves that go along with planting corn into, we use cereal rye. So every year there's a new issue. I wouldn't call them barriers, but there's new issues, and it's a learning process. It's a continual learning process.
Well, something that was brought up when we were talking earlier is about how essential it is to plan ahead. And so what is your planning process that you use to set yourself up for success when you're using cover crops? Norm, you want to go first this time?
I think the planning, I guess one other barrier I found going into it was our local co-op that does my fertilizer application and spraying application. I mean, it was hard to get them to do some of the things I needed to do in the timing. So the pre-planning, I have to spend a lot of time in the winter with co-ops that this is what we're going to use. This is how we're going to apply it. This is when we need to apply it. So spend a lot of time in the winter planning for the next year of how you're going to kill the crop, how we're going to supply nitrogen to the crop, and how we're going to go forward to that crop. In the summer, you spend your time is, how am I going to get the cover crop established? When am we going to do it? The labor to get it done, the timing to get it done. So it's a constant planning. You have to keep looking at the calendar and the timing of everything that goes with it. You got to take as much risk out of that as you possibly can.
John?
I would agree with Norm. The biggest change in being successful in adopting cover crops is the mindset and that planning, where you're planning on a rotational aspect rather than a seasonal aspect many times. So what you do with your herbicide selection within your soybean crop this year has a big bearing on the potential success or potential problems with cover crops that you might try to seed in the fall that would be conducive to corn, but they can be successfully controlled or really hampered by the development of that in the fall. So we need to take a look at the whole rotation and have figured out what we need to do with the crop ahead of when we will plant a specific cover crop for a specific reason, to make sure that we've got the path cleared for potential success and that we haven't created any self-imposed roadblocks. And I think that's one of the big things is that, we know how to manage a lot of these things, but the process of thinking through that management progression is different in this type of a system than it is a conventional system. And that's the key in my mind to success.
Brian, do you have anything you want to add?
No, they pretty much spoke everything that was on the top of my mind. It is, and back to John's point, it is a different management mindset, and I think that's part of why guys are hesitant to go down this path, because I won't say it's farming is necessarily easy, but what we've been doing, everybody's kind of got it figured out, and this is what works most years. And to think about doing something completely different is, I think, a roadblock for wider adaptation of using cover crops. So but both guys make all the points that I would make, as far as you're planning year round. You have to think about, as John said, you have to think about your herbicide choices for success for cover crops. And one of the things that we do to try to overcome some of the labor issues is we do fly on about not quite half of our cover crops. And there are challenges with that, but there are things that you can do to mitigate some of the risks with that. It isn't always successful, but we've had better luck. The longer we've been doing it, we've had better luck doing that, and that opens up wider choices of cover crops, so more diversity. Whereas like what we seed after we harvest fields, because it's getting late, we're in the year, we're kind of limited on what we can do for diversity up in this area. So we don't have as many choices when we fly it on, say, late August, first few days in September. So there's a lot of moving parts, and you have to be willing to make those management decisions, and they're not something that most of us have been used to in our farming careers. So
We've had the next couple questions are questions that have been submitted. So John, I'm going to put this one to you first. What is a good cover crop that will get established after beans ahead of corn to cut erosion on rolling ground?
Well, I think when we're talking about erosion control, cereal rye is the first thing that comes to mind because of the quick germination and biomass establishment that you get. But then you're confronted with a lot of the problems that you hear about with rye creating for corn, with nitrogen tie-up and those types of things. So the way I approach that is that everything that I do is in a mix, and I want to have a plan to where I can get that cover crop seeded, whether I'm going to put it on over the top with a drone or an airplane, or I've got a plan to get a field harvested sooner to get a cover crop established, to have enough seeding window to establish a cover crop that's more than cereal rye. But I think one of the misnomers with cereal rye is the fact that people hear things about problems that cereal rye creates, and they automatically think that cereal rye can't play a role in a cover crop mix ahead of corn. So I think that cereal rye is a good base component for a lot of that. I use a lot of annual ryegrass in my situation and mix that with cereal rye in some cases, and that can kind of mitigate some of that. But I think with having a plan on how you're going to manage that cereal rye, so we can have cereal rye in a mix. And if we go into the spring, we need to probably have a plan in wherever we're at in the state to terminate that relatively soon. Because if we terminate it in the small vegetative stage, whatever nutrients and nitrogen especially that's held up that is going to be less, and it's going to be released back into the system quicker and be more available. We don't want to be in a situation where we're planting corn into headed out cereal rye at anthesis like we see pictures of beans. So I think cereal rye would be a base component, but yet have that in a mix and have a plan to manage that, to take it out early. And, you know, in the spring, it might be a situation where it's not a total termination. Maybe we could take that cereal rye or whatever grass crop out with clethodim and let something like crimson clover grow a little bit more and plant into that, you know, later into the season. But that's my best guess at that.
Norm, do you want to?
Well, pretty much up where we're at, cereal rye is it. Going on soybean ground. And I would say I've flown it on, I've drilled it. You almost have to really get what you want for soil erosion control on bean ground, harvested bean ground, is you need to drill it in. And here's one thing I have learned, tried, takes a little bit extra labor, and I know labor is a big issue, but in my fields, any place that will carry water, or I think will carry water, I go and I drill that first, and then I drill the whole field. So I get a double on any place where I think water will run, and that makes a huge difference. In fact, it's so good in managing soil erosion that I've eliminated a number of grass ditches just by doing that.
Ryan, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I would echo what Norm said. That's kind of what we do too when we seed ourselves. And um, you know, I can remember in even in the first probably almost, well, if we started in 2000, say the first 10 years that we were doing cover crops, we still had issues with draws and fields eroding. But now that we've been much more consistent on doing, like Norm said, double seeding basically those areas, I haven't had to pull a field cultivator or anything out of the shed in the last 5 years, and those are actually improving, and you know, I don't have to do anything with them. I will say in my case, like a head of corn, I used to do cereal rye, and I have run into a year or two where I planted into headed out cereal rye with corn, and it turned out okay, but it isn't ideal. So I go to I either use triticale or winter barley, so they don't grow as aggressively in the spring, but if you can get established early enough, they can still kind of accomplish the same things. And then some of our fields that we know we're going to do later, we've actually started also putting in winter camelina, which has been very winter hardy. Annual ryegrass around here, I do love it, but I would say probably it's 50-50 on whether or not it'll survive the winter. I would rather use that because it isn't nearly as competitive with corn in the spring, but trying to get it to overwinter is a big issue here. So I think triticale and winter barley are better than cereal rye, at least in my experience and what I've tried, just because they just aren't quite as aggressive in the spring as what cereal rye is. Once cereal rye gets the right condition, and well, the cereal rye will grow all winter long, but man, when it starts to warm up in the spring, man, it can get out of control in a hurry. And if you have wet conditions and can't get in to terminate it and stuff like that, there can be some issues. And then another thing to consider, and that's what we've ended up doing, is we've always put starter on as long as I've been on the farm, but that was more in furrow stuff. Now I've re-outfitted our planter, so now we're putting on our nitrogen on at planting. So we put on about 45 pounds of nitrogen to try to overcome some of that tie-up issue until it starts becoming available as the growing season goes on as well.
And we have a question in the chat, and it's from Jordan. She says, thank you to the panelists for this great conversation. She's with the Farm Federation, Farm Foundation. It's an organization that brings people across agricultural sector together to accelerate practical solutions in agriculture. And she said that they're preparing to launch a new program focused on supporting young and next generation farmers. When it comes to cover crops here in Illinois, what are the biggest barriers holding farmers back from adopting them? And what should those just stepping into agriculture understand about cover crops and soil health to set them up for long-term success? Brian, you want to go first?
So I think and a lot of younger farmers now probably, unless they happen to be able to take over a family farm or something like that. But if you're just starting out on your own, I think one of the barriers, and it's something that, I as I said earlier, I do basically the same thing on all our farms, whether it's owned or rented. But I do find a struggle with landowners. So I don't know. I think education of landowners is important, and try to get them bought into it, and have them be a little bit more understanding of what you're trying to accomplish. And uh, so yeah, so I guess I'll leave that there. And then I think a big thing is finding a mentor or someone that that has experience. I think that can be a real key to overcoming some of the barriers, because a lot of us have been doing a long time. We always still make mistakes because we're always still trying to do something new, but we know a lot of the mistakes that we made in the past, and we can help a new farmer avoid some of the things that we already know this isn't going to work, especially in localized areas. This isn't going to work, so don't even try it. Here's what I would suggest you do. So some of those things I think can be very valuable to younger farmers or beginning farmers.
Norm?
It's a very tough question. I think one of the big things to overcome if they're coming into a large family farm is to overcome, well, we've always done it this way. And I think one of the things I thought about is the larger the farm, the more hired labor, and it's tough to get hired labor to do what you want to do when it comes to soil regeneration. There's a lot of education that would go into that. I think the mentor idea is a great idea because being a young farmer getting in, they don't have probably the margin of error that maybe we had or were blessed to have, because you just don't want to make some of the mistakes we made. It would be too tough on them economically. So I think, again, the management of it, they're going to have to want to do a lot of management. Are they going into farming just to be an operator, or are they going into farming for the management standpoint? Because the management standpoint is huge, and I think it will be huge for their success. And I just wouldn't want them see them go through the mistakes that we went through. I think they can eliminate those steps. That would be the advice to them. The other advice is, what do you want long term? Do you want your soils to be better? Do you want to grow the farms that you're farming, make them better for the next generation, or are you just farming to turn a profit, and you'll turn it over to the next guy and let him worry about it? I think that's a big decision.
John?
Great comments from Norm and Brian. I'll add to that. I don't know that it's a barrier, but one of the biggest stumbling blocks that I see with cover crop adoption, especially from beginners, is that we think of a cover crop as just another input. And to think of that as an input that we can substitute like a grass herbicide in our soybean or corn crop is not that easy, because we have to manage through that. And it's not that we have to change everything about our operation to make that work. But again, the thought process is a little bit different. And if we look at that cover crop as a system and how that can work well with everything else that we do, and if there's a plan A, we need to have a plan B too, because moisture considerations and timing are going to be more critical than just the page on the calendar. Another thing, back to Brian, is to find good mentors that are doing things, and not that you're going to find somebody necessarily that you're going to adopt every practice that they do, because we're all in slightly different situations. But if we can connect with the right people, there's a lot of things that we can adapt with the right management to fit our operation in a way that it probably wouldn't work someplace else. And I think that's very important, because there's in this stage of the game, there's a lot of good that we can get out of cover crop management, but a lot of most of the information behind that is not being disseminated through the typical university extension channels. It's more likely a farmer, like Brian said, if we can do things and offset some of the mistakes that we've done to help somebody not recreate those things, that's a critical thing. So I've worked with some of our university research teams to try to help them pair with farmers to get more effective research programs going on the ground, so our research programs don't relive the things that farmers that have done this for 15 or 20 years or more would know not to do right off of the bat. So it's not that there's not good university information that we can use, but we need to pair that with practical on-farm lived experience as well. And that's a different way of information gathering to build a good plan on to start a new operation than has been needed in other situations, I think.
You got to have open mind and open ears. Like in this first half an hour, I've learned stuff from John and Brian just because I'm in tune to what they're saying that I'll probably utilize. You always have to learn.
Yep.
Well, another question that we had submitted is, where does one begin if they would like to begin in regenerative farming? John, would you like to take that one first?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, I think again, the first step that I would recommend is to find somebody that's doing it that you can connect with. And those connections probably aren't going to be the most fruitful coming from Facebook, honestly. I think Facebook does one of the biggest disservice to a lot of agriculture endeavors and people that are enthusiastic about things, because I follow several of the pages that are involved with cover crops, and I'll see somebody ask a question about how to do this. And sometimes I know them, or I know the area that they're from, and inevitably somebody will come in and they'll from out of the area and immediately say, well, you need to do X, Y, and Z. Well, that might be right in Kansas or Ohio or Canada, but it probably doesn't fit Central Illinois or Eastern Iowa, where the question probably came from. So you need to have a strong filter about where that information comes from, and avoid asking questions on open forums like Facebook pages. There are some good ones that are closed. If we can get involved with that through some of the mentorship programs, I think there's some value in that, but we need to be hesitant about that. But find a farmer that's doing it, and it might, you might have to go 80 or 100 miles, but there's a lot of people around that are doing this thing. And I would say about anywhere that we stood in the state of Illinois, there's someone that's doing some aspect of cover crop and no-till management very successfully within 50 or 60 miles. It's just a matter of finding that. So I think that's the biggest key that I would recommend.
Brian?
Gosh, I don't know if I have anything to add to that. Yeah, I think John hit it right on the head. And I do the same thing. And quite honestly, I did use social media when I first got started. But it was talking to people that I knew and knew that they had experience, and also understanding that they may not be in my area, but they get, it was an idea for me to get started. But I agree. I look at a lot of the same pages, and you get people that comment from all over the place. No, 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 you need to do this. Well, yeah, you're 2 states away. It's not the same thing. So yeah, having those closed pages, but again, seeking someone out in your local area that has experience, and local being whatever that is, like John said, up to maybe 100 miles away, but finding someone that has experience, and us, like I would consider myself, I try to mentor people when they come to me with questions, realizing that what I do may not work for them, whether it's from their current time trying to do stuff, whether they're starting, they've been doing it for a couple years, or that makes a difference too, because of their management expertise at that point, but then also realizing geographical differences as well, and trying to think through those points, and making suggestions that I think that could help them, even though that might not be where I'm at right now, but I've been through the gamut so far, and I can have a relatively educated guess on things that they can try to get started. So
Norm?
I look at it, I try to simplify it as much as possible. If the word regenerative ag came out, I want to do a regenerative ag program. That's a little intimidating. That sounds like something totally new. I know John and I talked about it a little earlier when we met last week, but I think the key is simple. You have to have a goal. What is your goal? When I got involved in this, my simple goal was to stop erosion. I've learned about all these things, and people have taught me about all these things going forward. But if you go after the big regenerative ag thing, I think it's just too big. What are the simple goals you want to accomplish on your farm, and do those, and then see what happens with the rest of the implementation of regenerative ag. But I think you got to start small and just go piece by piece, but have a goal.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing, could I add another thing to that, Rachel?
Absolutely.
One thing that, well, I've lost my train of thought now. Good grief. Go on, I'll remember it. I'm sorry.
All good. One of the things that we also talked about when we met was about myth busting. And so, what is the number one myth that you hear about cover crops, and what do you wish folks would know? So John, we'll go with you first.
I think that one of the biggest myths is that it's a two-sided coin. Either there's a group that runs through the valley that says that cover crops are nothing but roses and butterflies, and to throw out some seed that'll solve every problem that you have. And then you've got the other side of the movement that said that anything to do with a cover crop is terrible. And it all relates to management, and the good part of any system is kind of coming to the middle and sorting out the shades of gray about what works in a particular situation. So I think sometimes some of the meetings that I've been involved with in the past, they're too they get too fixated on terminology like regenerative or sustainable or something. Well, all I want to do is farm successfully. And to my point that I forgot a minute ago, it's the fact that when some people hear about regenerative, they often think it's a minimalist approach. And I don't know what regenerative is, and sustainable. I think I know how to grow corn and soybeans and wheat pretty well in Illinois. but I want to use cover crops and no-till systems and all the things involved with that to put together a way to grow a more successful, higher yielding, higher profitable crop. And if we look at this, that we're going to all of a sudden do something, and that's going to reduce the need for us to use modern technologies. If we can get around that, that's fine. But I look at it as a component that I can add to the rest of my operation and use that effectively with the seed, herbicide, equipment, and all of the other technology that we have to do things better and to make my soils better and more productive. And making things better and productive, the root of that is to keep it in place. And if we don't see as much muddy water and we can control erosion of all types, that's a good thing. And as we have more severe weather patterns that come through, especially in the early spring, where we can have maybe 2 or 3 or 4 inch rains at a time before the crop rooting system gets to the point where it can hold it. Well, in a reduced tillage situation, it's going to be more likely to withstand that punishing rain system than if the ground is worked up like a lettuce bed. And we've got planter technologies that don't require that to get good seed to soil contact and to offset all the other reasons why we did tillage. And I'm not against tillage. I think it has a place, but we need to find the best package that we have to move forward. And I think finding that middle ground somewhere in the shades of gray is where we need to be looking to find the best for what works with us.
Ryan?
I don't know, this maybe isn't necessarily a myth. So one thing I hear about from a lot of farmers in my area is they just purely look at it as an expense. That's all they think about. It's going to cost me this much money. And granted, it does cost you money. So I always try to tell guys that, well, there are programs where you can get started. They'll offset some of that cost, and they're the longer I've been doing this, the more that I find, there's government programs, there's non-government organizational programs, there's all kinds of places where you can get some financial help to get started in that journey. But I guess I was fortunate when I started, farming was pretty profitable at that time. And I always viewed it as an, maybe not the first year or two, but after I started to learn more about other things, viewed it as an investment. So the stuff that I've been doing over the last 15 years now, I'm to the point where I'm able to cut back on applied fertilizer, and I'm able to cut back on some herbicide applications and things like that. So I put that investment in. Now I'm starting to reap the benefits of that. So it's always about having, and I think Norm probably mentioned this earlier, if I remember right, having not only having a goal, but having a long-term goal. And where do you want to get to? And like, I'm to the point now where I'm starting to reap the benefits of what my long-term goal was. So I guess that would be maybe not a myth, but things I hear that guys say about it getting started.
Norm?
Yeah, I think Brian sums it up. The myth of expense, really, it isn't. It can become a profit center from the standpoint. I think the myth that, oh, my yields will go down. Well, the yields are going to go the other way if you stick with the program. Probably the biggest myth, if I'd have to say there is a myth, is you can't do cover crops for 1 year and it's going to be wonderful. I mean, it's a commitment to a multi-year thing to get your crop or to get your land conditioned and get it ready and you to understand the system and the management. That's when it's going to pay off. Much like Brian said, it's an investment in the future.
So let's move on to cover crop management and experience. So one of the questions that was submitted asked, how many seeds per acre or pounds per acre do you plant for different cover crops? Norm, you want to go first on that one?
Well, it's pretty simple. I'm pretty much cereal rye up here, and currently I'm doing 50 pounds of cereal rye per acre. I could probably cut that back a little bit, I think. I probably will experiment with that, maybe get down to 40 pounds. I mean, you could say that saves on the expense side, but I do want to have enough cover out there to to help my erosion problem. So kind of pretty simple, straightforward for me.
John?
It's going to depend on what species of cover crop we're looking at, because there's everything has different seed sizes to it. So that's going to 10 pounds of one thing is going to equate to a lot more seed and ground coverage than 10 pounds of something else. But I think just in general, I always encourage people when they're starting out to stay at a more modest seeding rate. And because many times I'll go out to a field and that is from a first time or early adoption cover crop, and as a farmer mentality is something that we want to plant something out there and we want to see a good stand, a solid, vigorous growth of things. And our cover crop fields don't need to look like a well-managed wheat field or oat field. If we've got, depending on the species that we're dealing with, if we would have maybe 8 or 10 seeds per square foot in some cases, that might give us a good suitable cover crop in a particular situation. Sometimes we might want 30 seeds per square foot, depending on what that is. But I would start at a more modest rate, because many of the speakers that I see at conferences and things that are featured, they tend to be the more advanced folks, and they've got their equipment all fine tuned, and their goals are usually different than what someone that's taking the first couple steps in the initiation process would be. And I think staying a little bit on the modest seeding rates and then working up if we see the need to do that as we go down the line will help to avoid unneeded challenges.
Brian?
Yeah, I think John summed it up pretty well. Obviously depends on species. So like I talked about, I plant triticale, I plant that about 50 pounds of the acre. And then I also throw in some winter camelina, and that's only like maybe 2 pounds per acre. So species is, and then, guys like radishes, that might be 1.5 pounds per acre. And then also, and he spoke to that as well, what are your goals? Where are you at in your journey? So I'm far enough along at, and I was up a fair amount higher rate on some of my grass stuff. And I've been gradually easing it back again. If you're looking for weed control, and I do that, so that's part of my weed control program is my cover crop. So you got to kind of find that happy balance on where you have a good enough stand to help suppress weed germination. But at the same point in time, you don't want so much out there that you have trouble planting your cash crop, because at the end of the day, part of sustainability is making money, and you're growing a cash crop is your first goal. All these other things are things that we're trying to do to enhance that profitability. So
Somebody else submitted a question which asked which cover crop species are best suited to northeastern Illinois. And so, Norm, since that's closer to your neck of the woods, do you want to take a stab?
I mean, I think if you really want to have a cover crop and you want to have it established over the winter, cereal rye is the go-to. I don't have enough experience on some of the other things. Now, I have seen a lot of people, they experimented for a year. Maybe they flew on oats or radishes, something that will get a winter kill, because I think they're afraid of what we talked about in the spring, it growing too fast and not being able to control. So if you want to dabble in that and take a little risk out of it, maybe fly some oats and radishes onto your soybeans and see what happens, or plant them in after you harvest them.
John or Brian, do you have any other thoughts?
I guess my experience in the last couple of years of using winter camelina, I think that's something that kind of fits our geography. I was a little concerned about it at first, but especially like this last year, we had a pretty good test of it. We didn't have a lot of snow cover, and we had some really cold temperatures a couple of different times in the winter, and it survived the winter very well. So if you're looking at some diversity, that's something that you could put in there, and it's easy to manage in the spring has been my experience. But I agree with Norm. I mean, cereal rye is, I mean, that stuff will grow if the soil temperature is like 34 degrees. If you have a little snow cover in the wintertime, like I've been amazed in years where it's gotten well below zero, but we had good snow cover and the snow melts off. I'm like, holy cow, that's like an inch taller than it was 6 weeks ago. So that it is very good. Triticale is pretty close to being as good and a little easier to manage in the spring, but yeah, cereal rye up in northern Illinois is probably going to be the top contender.
John?
I, I concur with everything that's been said. I'm curious too about the winter camelina, and even in as we move south in the state, as that was something that might pair well to allow us to get a cover crop on some of our double crop beans that are following wheat. That as it stands now, it's pretty dicey on getting any of that, getting anything in there. So I'm going to try some of that this year, but I think that's good. And no doubt as you move to the north, your options are reduced a little bit. But one of the things to remember is anything that we can do to get the crop seeded quicker is going to help. So we need to have some establishment to ensure the best standard of winter survivability, and even up in there, the right conditions can take that out. So early, along with what's been said species wide, I think anything to do that we can establish that stand earlier is something to think about too.
All right, well, we are almost out of time, which seems crazy. This has been some great discussion. There was one more question that was submitted that maybe each of you can hit on, a resource that examines the financial impact of some of the different regenerative farming practices like cover crops, no-till, and so on. Especially, this person was interested in the reduction in costs from additives and drainage solutions. And they were also wondering, how do you communicate these to your friends and your co-owners or landowners?
I'll take a stab at it first. I think that in some of the informational meetings that I've been involved with, the Soil Health Institute has put together several good case scenarios of cost and production issues from around a bigger part of the Midwest. But they've talked to several people throughout Illinois and over into Indiana that would be applicable. The SARE program, Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education Program, that's housed at the University of Missouri. They in this north central region here, they've done a series of case studies and have some information about that as well. And I think the PCM data is something that I would keep in mind, and that's been a good program. And I think as their data set increases and covers more acres, and we get producers that are involved in that program that have a longer history with cover crop management and changes, especially in central Illinois, that will help a lot. Because right now, I think that there's some jading to that information as far as the very, very best soils in central Illinois aren't something that are getting cover crops thought right now anyway. So as we look at the acreage in those regions that are getting cover crops, they're probably something that's a little bit on the marginal side anyway. So it's not always an apples to apples direct correlation, but I think that the PCM data is sure a good component to keep an eye on for our specific Illinois information for sure.
Quickly, I know we're at time and we need to wrap up, but Brian or Norm, is there anything else you wanted to add?
add one other source real quick because those were going to be some that I was gonna mention, but and their Practical Farmers of Iowa has a lot of good resource information, and they are starting to do more outside of the state of Iowa. So I'm working with them this year on some nitrogen rate trials on a farm, but they do all kinds of different things with nutrients, cover crops, all that kind of stuff. They have a ton of field days. They have a lot of data and information available from field trials and things like that. So that'd be another good source.
Anything you wanted to add, or?
No, I use PCM. Actually, the thing I think a lot of the data still, I know they're trying. I don't know how provable it is at this particular point.
It's hard to collect.
Huh?
It's hard to collect.
Yeah, it's hard to collect. The one thing I look at, to be honest with you, I look at my soil tests over the years when I started no-till and when I added cover crops, and my organic matter has gone up 2.6% since adding cover crops. And I can equate that to being able to grow better crops, because when I can increase my organic matter, I have a better farm.
All right. Well, unfortunately, there were a lot more questions that we were hoping to get to. But I just want to thank everyone who's here today for your time and your interest. And a very special thank you to our farmer panelists for sharing your knowledge and experience of cover crops with us today. I also want to say thank you again to the Illinois Soybean Association for their continued support and supporting this farmer panel. And also another thank you to the 5 county soil and water conservation districts that we're working on this cover crop program with. It's Whiteside, Carroll, Mercer, Henry, and Coles County. So if you farm in any of those counties and are interested in learning more, I would encourage you to reach out to your soil and water conservation districts or anyone on our team. And with that, we have a post-meeting poll to let us know what you learned today and if there are any topics that you would be interested in learning more about.
Thanks, Rachel. Brian,
Yeah,
John, I learned a lot from you guys.
I did as well.